Welcome back to the Chelsea Pants Sew Along. Today is day 3, and today we'll be constructing the front seams of our pants and the front and back crotch seam. Now these pants don't have a side seam, so the front seam kind of functions as the one center seam on the pants. So we're going to be sewing those 3 seams. Should be pretty quick and easy, and you're going to want to make sure you have your sewing machine or your serger handy. One thing that I haven't talked very much about yet is the right needle. You want to make sure that you're using the right needle for your fabric. If you're not, you're probably getting some skip stitches. So the right needle is going to be one depending on what fabric you've got. So if you've got a thicker, stretch denim, there are some stretch denim or some denim needles that you could get. If you're using a knit fabric, then you're going to want to use a stretch needle. And depending on the weight of the knit fabric, you're going to want to use a different type of stretch needle. So if you're using a thinner pont knit fabric, then you might want to use like an 80-12 stretch needle. If you're using a thicker scuba or something like that, then maybe even a 90-14 stretch needle. So you're just going to want to make sure that you're using those. I don't ever change out the needles in my serger. Those are always stretch needles, and those work just fine for me, regardless of the type of fabric. They've worked great on my stretch denim. They've worked great on my pont. So I think either way you're good there. But make sure that you've taken that into account when you're sewing the pants. So let's get started, and I'll show you how to assemble the pants. When we're done today, you should have something that's really starting to look like a pair of pants. So let's get going. The next step after you've constructed your pockets and basted or sewn them on, and I don't have pockets on this pair, but if you've done that already, the next step is to assemble the front seam. Now you can do this a couple of ways. You can just go ahead and place your front piece right sides together with your back piece. You want to make sure that the crotch seams are facing away, and you're going to sew the seam down along the center front of the pants at 3/8 of an inch. Then you would press it to the side and top stitch it. What I'm finding that I prefer is to actually go ahead and serge each of these edges separately and then sew them together and press that seam open. I like how that looks because then I can top stitch on either side of the seam, holding the seam open, and I just like the look of that double top stitching on the side of each side of the seam. So that's what I'm going to do, and you can do it that way, or you can follow the instructions and just sew down along here, right sides together, press it to one side and top stitch. Something else that you may want to consider, I typically do this whether I'm using stretch denim or a pont fabric like this. I do that on my serger, and then I do the top stitching with my sewing machine. If I'm using denim, I'll use a denim needle. If I'm using like a really stretched fabric like a Pont Aroma or a Scuba, then I will use a heavier knit needle. So you just want to make sure you have the right needle for that, but I don't change out the needles in my serger no matter what I'm doing. So I'm going to go ahead and go over to my serger, and I'm going to finish those seams, and then I'm going to stitch them together with my sewing machine and then press them open, and I'll show you how that looks when I come back. So I've gone ahead and serged each of those seams, deviating from the instructions just a little bit. Now I'm going to pin these 2 pieces right sides together, and if you're not going to be pressing that seam open and you're going to be pressing it to the side, then you just need to skip that serging step there. You would just pin right sides together like I'm doing here. And these are really long, so I like to just pin them in multiple places or clip them in multiple places to make sure that they stay kind of connected with each other and that I don't end up with one piece that's longer than the other unintentionally. So I've got that pinned. That's going to be that center front seam. So now if you're working with a knit fabric or even a denim and you just want to use your serger and go ahead and serge that seam and press it to one side, you can do that. I'm going to use my sewing machine with a stretch needle because I want to be able to press it open. So I'm just going to go ahead and sew at 3/8 of an inch all the way down when I did serge these edges, I was careful not to cut anything off, so you don't want to lose any seam allowance there. But I'm going to sew all the way down here, the center front part, at 3/8 of an inch, and then I'm going to press it open, and I'll come back and show you what that looks like. So I've gone ahead and pressed my seams, and I've chosen to top stitch on either side. It's probably kind of challenging to see because it's a dark fabric and I did it in black, but I like the double lines. And I just made sure that I did that on the very edge so that it would tack down the seam on the back side. I did use my sewing machine, and I used a slightly longer stitch length, a 3mm stitch length for that top stitching, because I find it works well and it looks more ready to wear, I think. So now you're going to take your 2 pants pieces and you're going to place them right sides together, and you're going to sew your crotch seams. Now there's actually 2 different ways that you can construct pants. You can do them, the instructions have you sew the front, the back and the front crotch seam, and then sew the inner legs. That's a good idea if you don't feel like you're going to need any crotch adjustments, and I don't with these, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. But an alternate method would be to sew the legs together separately. If you were worried about needing to adjust your crotch depth, you could sew that inner leg seam first on both of your pants, and then turn one right sides out, slip it inside the other, and then sew all the way around your crotch seam in a U. So that is another option if you are thinking you might need to make some adjustments to the depth of your crotch seam. But I'm going to do it as it's explained in the instructions because I have made several of these and they actually fit really well. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, and then I will come back and show you what that looks like. So I'm going to put them right sides together and sew my front and my back crotch seams. You may also want to consider double stitching these, especially if you're using something and you know that they're going to be kind of tight, something with a lower amount of stretch. You may want to serge it and then stitch with your sewing machine right on top of that serging. So I'll come back and show you what that looks like. Okay, so I've serged, this is my center front seam, and I've gone ahead and I've serged it, but I'm going to double stitch it. I don't want any kind of unfortunate accidents happening or split the crotch or the back seam. That's something we definitely want to avoid. So I've gone ahead and serged it, and then I'm going to stitch right along the edge of my serging. And I'm going to use, show you on my machine, this 106. This is kind of a lightning bolt stitch, and this is my stretch stitch. And so that's what I'm going to use. If you don't have that kind of stitch on your machine, you could use a zigzag, or you could even use a lengthened straight stitch, and if you don't have even a zigzag. But this will allow for the most stretch. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to go back and I'm going to do that right on top of the seam just so it kind of has double strength, and then I'm going to press that to one side. So now I've gone ahead and I've serged and double stitched those center front and center back crotch seams, and I've actually chosen to open it up and top stitch it as well. This just helps the seam allowance lay flat. I think it looks especially good on a stretch denim, but I've chosen to do it here too. Gives a little extra strength to that seam. So now what you're going to do is you should have something that looks like this, and you're going to put those center back and center front seams together like this, match them up here, and I like to use a pin at that point just to kind of keep them together. So I take a pin and just put it through at about 3/8 of an inch, and then check and see if I've lined it up right, and I have. And then you're going to pin or clip all the way down both legs. You shouldn't have to ease anything in. It should match up just right. all the way down, and then all the way down the other leg. And again, I like to put a few clips in just to make sure that nothing gets off. Another one here. So now you have something we're going to sew down across this crotch seam and all the way down the other leg to the hem. So you don't have to double stitch that one, although you certainly can. I don't think it gets as much stress as the other seams. So I'm just going to go ahead and do that one on my serger and then give it a press. And I'll come back and show you what you've got. You should have something that's starting to resemble a pair of pants.